Welcome to the Blockbusters and Birdwalks podcast. I am the curator, Garrett Chaffin-Quiray. Today we have a conversation with a friend, Ed Rosa.
That's me. Hi. My filmmaking partner and I have a YouTube channel, Toothless Richard Productions, where you can see a number of our short films. A blockbuster is a film that makes disgusting amounts of money. They tend to be movies that sort of invade the popular consciousness in a way that's difficult to avoid.
I tell people that a blockbuster is a $100 million gross in a single territory. What is the story of Cleopatra?
It's a historical tome about how two of the most significant leaders and military men in the ancient world were completely whipped.
You're also watching this be a figurative demonstration of what star power is. A Richard Burton Elizabeth Taylor vehicle built around Elizabeth Taylor, earlier organized by one of her earlier husbands, the only one who predeceased her, who she never divorced, Mike Todd. And it's intended to be a showcase of her physical beauty. It is such a thing.
Yes.
But then there's her new lover and eventual twice-over husband. And the other guy is Rex Harrison, who I only know from very different kinds of roles. So this was jarring to see him be this sober, bronzed Roman leader named Julius Caesar.
Instead of Professor Henry Higgins.
Henry, yes. Which, of course, helped make his reputation, as did this movie and many other things he did in the 50s, 60s, on into the 70s. So Burton plays Mark Antony, and the title role is Elizabeth Taylor.
Yes. I didn't actively realize this until you just mentioned it right now, but like these were totally the same two from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
Yeah. These movies are separated by, I think, 4 years of time. They were not old making that movie, and they're not old making this one. He is older than her chronologically. When I say old, as a person now in my 50s, that means something distinct when you're looking at people in their 30s who are in the glory, the full flower of the mature beauty that they possess. So around them is this gigantic cast. And around that gigantic cast is an even more gigantic set of costumes, props, and then physical locations and settings and the like, which makes this movie not just epic, because it will be called that, length, etc., but truly spectacular. Aside from that, my basic reaction to anybody who cares, and so here you are, is I couldn't watch this in a single sitting. I kept being interrupted by distraction.
Outside of a theatrical setting, it can be tough to commit to a full 4 hours and 11 minutes in one go.
And then it is an episodic tale, because it is divided roughly into two not equal halves, but first it's the conquest of Egypt and love affair between Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, which maps, and the second portion is Mark Antony, who is an inheritor of part of Julius Caesar's empire, making love to Cleopatra and defending Egypt from the Romans. I was reminded of my real entree into this study of history through popular culture, and that was the Rome series on HBO.
Which was magnificent.
And it covers a lot of the same material.
Yeah.
As I was watching the movie, I kept thinking to myself, this is the performer that I met in that earlier TV show. Of course, this was 50 years before that TV show, and there they are and how they make these adjustments. Where that becomes acute is in some of the famous performers who were earning their stripes as emerging actors. But here I'm thinking like Carroll O'Connor.
Yeah, Archie Bunker.
He's one of the assassins of
totally.
Julius Caesar. There he is. When we see these faces crop up, Hume Cronin playing this sort of notable advisor to Queen Cleopatra. So we see these faces, and they echo faces I saw in Rome, and all of that gels with the general understanding I've got of Mediterranean history from grade school, middle school, high school.
Yeah.
The thing is, this movie looks so good visually that I found myself kind of stunned, even on my little restricted screen. So every time I would sort of forgive myself, go check that email, go make a sandwich, and then take a break and come back, I continue to be swept along. Although I want to say, it's an entirely different movie when Richard Burton shows up for real.
Yeah.
And when he shows up, it becomes a proper entertainment.
Yeah.
Before that, it's really great craft. It's terribly impressive design. It's really wonderfully produced, but you're kind of thinking, so what?
Well, yeah, Rex Harrison he's very good, but he's much lower key, I guess. Like, Burton really tends to, like, chew the scenery. It's like Kill Bill 1 and 2, almost, even though that was intended to be, one...
Moods of difference,
one film, and it actually works better if you ever get to see it as one film. Each half is so sort of distinct from the other one.
What I think became most fun for me, because I'm knowledgeable of this period of time, is thinking about what was happening in the Hollywood machine to have arrived at this movie with these stars. And so a couple of things to just throw in the air, and we can ping-pong as we wish. One is this trait of Julius Caesar who shows up sort of late in his life, because we know it's going to happen to him eventually on the Ides of March when he upsets everybody else in the Senate. He shows up in Egypt and basically lays claim to it in such a way that it's going to be my domain, but he kind of digs this lady, Cleopatra, while he sorts out this dynastic problem she's got with her brother. But he constantly is reflecting on the fact, I'm growing old. I earlier mentioned I'm in my 50s. Well, that's how old he is supposed to be at his death. When I think he meets her, he's somewhere, I think, in his middle 40s. They have a love affair that lasts a period of years, but he doesn't make it to age 55 before the knives fall. So there's this trait that the movie is on screen talking about a man fading from glory, trying to secure his legacy through having a boy son, having a proper love affair, accomplishing world domination in the form of Alexander the Great, a constant reference point.
Right.
But basically, he's got daddy troubles. He finds this great-looking woman who's like, well, I'll give you stuff, but I'm going to manipulate you. And you know that's what's happening, but you're old. So won't that be a fun way to go out? And, of course, Rex Harrison is significantly older than Elizabeth Taylor.
Yeah.
So we're watching that on screen happen with the principals, and that's a good reflection on what happens a lot in the entertainment industry. An aging rooster finds a young chicken and pecks to make stars of them both as one last call of glory before he's simply too old to get away with it.
Right.
And in the wings, you got a young rooster, and there's Burton taking over things from the wings, and of course Caesar dies, Antony shows up, and then we have this very robust love affair where we can see they're hot for each other. The Harrison-Taylor pairing, it's just a political arrangement, which does result in a child, at least one, but it's in no way filled with that stuff of life.
Yeah, it doesn't have the same heat.
Yeah. Next ball to throw in the air. This movie has always been reputed as one of the most expensive things that's ever been made.
I have no problem believing that.
Just the number of people on screen in some of the sequences, the excess of parade that happens in certain sequences that really, even now, even on my little screen, it was jaw-dropping.
Yeah, Cleopatra's initial arrival, the first time she comes to Rome, and it just keeps going and going.
Right. It's imagine every Circus Vargas show you've ever heard of.
Yeah.
You throw in there Cirque du Soleil, everything you can imagine, plus marching bands and a big army. It's everything, and smoke.
Yeah.
And of course, because that's the fact, we're also watching in the early 60s when this movie is being made and when it's finally released, we're watching the foreclosure of the classical Hollywood system, which just founders in the 1960s.
Yeah.
By the late 60s, by the time we get Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, we've seen Hollywood shift away from these gigantic spectacles because people aren't turning out to watch them.
As we've sort of talked about, a lot of them just aren't good enough.
To put a real point on that, in my research is to reacquaint myself with this movie and its background. It released on one screen in New York City with a premium roadshow ticket price. And at that time, when you adjust for inflation, it would be like you and me going to the show for something like $80 to $120 a ticket.
Wow.
This movie did earn a lot of money, but because it was so expensive to go find and earn that money, it was very hard to recoup it because, of course, then, different from now, a movie would roadshow and then eventually it would stop roadshowing. It would just be presented in regional cinema chains, and it could take several years for a movie to make the round. Several years in which you're paying back bond and interest on the investment capital.
This thing didn't break even, I think, until 1973, which is like 10 years after it came out.
And that seems completely legitimate because it probably took that long to actually touch every territory on Earth. And then finally you have TV release. Eventually you have a videotape experience when we were kids and a DVD experience. And then dorks like us who are doing Blu-rays and digital files and all of the rest. My point then, This movie was reputed to have cost $44 million in the early 60s.
Wow, that seems like not a lot.
Well, which would be something like $400 million
Oh,
today.
okay, so it is a lot.
Right, when you inflation adjust, it's significant.
Okay, yeah.
We should attend the other side of it, which is suggesting that it earned something like $58 million in a gross, which is something over $600 million at the box office. But as you say, it took all of those years to find all of that money, and it cost all that money up front, which means this was an incredible risk. On top of it, being more than 4 hours long, you could probably at best show this twice in a day.
Yeah.
And that's going to cut down on the volume of popcorn sales. So who wants to do that? If you're a theater owner, you have to sort of almost be bribed by the studio. You add all that together, and, well, this movie, while it did earn money eventually, and while it is splendid mostly, it's inert in parts, and that's a signal that it's a failure of a kind of filmmaking. So that is up on screen. We're seeing them throw every last thing they can put in front of us. Camera tricks, really significantly impressive special effects shots, lots of combat choreography, severed heads. I mean, we're getting some stuff.
Yeah, yeah. The amount of flesh on display, there's nothing like really over the top, but certainly I was like, for 1963,
right.
There was a little more flesh than I expected.
Well, we see her lying down getting a massage with a towel draped over one of her cheeks, but she's clearly naked.
Yeah.
And I believe that's a shot that was done on a set that caused her to catch her chill and actually halt the production for a period of months while she dealt with bronchitis and pneumonia.
She must have been naked for hours.
Hours.
I mean,
to get the lighting just so.
Yeah.
And,
well, and you know, you blow one take and you got to reset for the next one.
Because it's a moving camera with a lot of stuff happening around it.
And with a set this big and this much crew and this many lights, I mean, it had to be. You know, I don't know what time she's arriving on set, but it was probably hours before they even rolled.
And I think she was famously, self-absorbed, so she was showing it when she felt like it. She was falling in love with Burton. They were enjoying Italy, and I think much of this was shot at Cinecittà, and on and on. When I hit IMDb just to get some basic facts right and understand what I'm looking at, I think it's slapped with a G, which is shocking.
Yeah. Because
just her body's display and that of all of her handmaidens, my goodness, there's a flesh pot afoot in Cleopatra's private bedchamber.
Yeah.
And then there's a terrific amount of violence. A lot of swordplay, a lot of knifings, a lot of arrowings, beheading. There's a lot of stuff that's quite nasty and gross.
Yeah. For the time, I have to believe there might have been some sort of jaws agape.
Now, that sets in motion a contextual statement about Garrett's relationship to this movie. And among my family members, Elizabeth Taylor has always been held up as sort of the preeminent white woman. Her physical beauty was on par with nobody else. Because I think that stamped a certain mid-century Western woman on what beauty should be from when she emerges in national velvet and carries forward until, well, she becomes a middle-aged person somewhere in the 1970s.
Right.
Separate from that, she was physically cursed with a lot of terrible problems, a broken back and lots of ailments that caused her to drift over into substance abuse, which, of course, added up to all of the things that made her life difficult.
Right.
But we're seeing her in this movie at approximately age 28 to 30, and that's a pretty choice age for most of us. Childhood is burned away. We haven't begun to lose ourselves yet in disease or ailments or the problems of our lifestyle choices. Right. We're holding on. And she's exquisite.
Yeah.
And everybody around her also is exquisite. Now, this movie has always been talked about in my household when it would pop up as that great movie. And when I was a kid, that was always one of those significant, let's go to Blockbuster and rent it. But when you see something that's 2 or 3 video cassettes long, I mean, that's decadent when you got a younger sibling you can entertain too. So getting around to this all of these years later with you has been a way to fill in a hole, a gap in my family understanding of how she was received in the 1960s by my elders who were then taking pointers from her about what style and beauty are.
Right.
And now measuring that against my so-called mature self. But the movie is just kind of flat for 2 hours. The intermission comes before the halfway point because that's Caesar's death. And then here comes Antony.
Why did you not give my head to Agrippa? Be no great loss to me. Dying a second time is painless, they say, and possibly of great advantage to you. The basis, perhaps, of a great new alliance with Rome.
I do not want a great new alliance with Rome.
And what do you want?
I have come for Mark Antony. What is left of his army, Rufio, my son, and I, all of Egypt, are waiting for him. There is little time.
The movie is called Cleopatra, but, like, honestly, it's more of Caesar and Mark Antony's story kind of than it is hers.
It's a sword fight.
Right. And she's kind of the glue that binds the two of them together, but she really takes a back seat.
Yeah. Well, famously, this movie set a new mark on the number of costumes that a single performer could wear in a movie.
There's a couple of times where she, like, in the middle of the scene...
There's an odd point, and it's in the second act, where they're doing a montage to pass time, and you're right, she exits stage left and comes in a new wardrobe, and then Antony goes stage right, comes back in a new bit of armor. They're just sort of speeding up time with this odd editing choice, which is nowhere else evident. I went, whoa, what a strange thing. But you're right. It's almost like, hey, we're aiming for 65 costume changes. We're at 58. Pile them in, man. Keep them coming.
Right, like, I think it's time for another one.
And that idea of being a clothes horse, I have used over the years to denote somebody who cannot act, who is just a physical specimen, and we're there just to gaze upon them. In this movie, I want to call her a clothes horse, but not pejoratively. She is meant to demonstrate all of this fabric and threadwear and all of this makeup, and that does take the place of having a proper performance. She often just walks into rooms and stands, and everybody bows to her, that kind of a thing.
Right.
But that strikes me as probably a correct thing for a kind of a royal figure.
But because I don't mean to say that she's bad either, because then I think of, like, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and she's incredible in that. Whatever I found lackluster about her performance or the character of Cleopatra in this, I don't put any of the blame on Elizabeth Taylor.
I agree. Now, Rex Harrison delivers a kind of performance which is an old style of how men would perform in a movie and on stage. It's eloquent. He's got a sense of humor. He doesn't move quickly or much. Burton is doing something else.
Yeah.
He's inherited a different set of techniques, which were probably brought to the fore with the likes of James Dean and Marlon Brando. And though he wasn't trained in that way, he uncorks a bit. You get an impression of him having an interior life. You don't really get a lot of that from Taylor in this movie.
Yeah.
Although she's obviously gifted enough to have a very rich one we would learn in other performances. There is a spot later in the movie when she is by herself, tells all of her attendants to leave her, and she becomes unhinged. Anthony! But she gets 1 minute in 4 hours to do that.
Right.
And largely is doing nothing else but pontificating, flirting with the fellas, and clothes horsing all the way
looking
around.
Amazing, yeah.
Now, that contrasts very importantly with the way Burton deals with this thing. Burton gets to be a person with lusts and feelings. And earlier I said part of the figurative elements of this piece, old guy fading, that's Harrison as Caesar, young guy on the rise, and that's Antony.
Right.
Caesar is also an intellectual. He's rich. He understands the patterns of statecraft. Antony is brutal.
Yeah.
He's a man of the soldiery. And he even acknowledges it more and more in the second half of the movie. And that's a kind of a guy that I've certainly met.
Yeah.
And I'm very sympathetic with that because he understands what he is and his limitations, and he loves this woman who's going to ruin him, and he knows it.
Yeah. Well, and that makes it real easy for Roddy McDowell.
Octavian. It would eventually become the new Caesar. Right.
Yeah, that kind of, because he's got that kind of intellectual and, like, political acumen.
He is mean-spirited, self-interested, and ambitious.
Yeah. You hate him.
What's remarkable is this movie won a lot of sort of down-table awards.
It won the
design.
technical stuff.
Yeah. And that strikes me as just, and it was nominated for some of the big awards, but what was weird is, given my own feelings about it, Harrison is nominated for actor. He was somebody whose ring was going to be kissed. He hadn't yet done Dr. Dolittle to kind of ruin a part of his reputation. His drunkenness hadn't yet overcome his professional quality and his box office appeals. Again, he's an old guy fading with among his last couple of big roles before really the long drift and fade to nothing.
Yeah.
Because I'm of a similar age to these performers and the historical figures that they're playing, it just strikes me that I don't feel like I'm used up yet.
Yeah, right.
I think there's more future in front of me.
More gas in the tank.
As another contributor who I really admired in this thing, it's the music of Alex North.
Yeah. Ancient Rome predated the charting of music. So Alex North is tasked with coming up with this score, and it's got to sound regionally appropriate and era appropriate. But I've always been fascinated by this because, like, if I just heard some of the score from this, like, aside from the movie, I would think, like, oh, this sounds like it's from, like, ancient Roman times. But how can, like, we really know what that music sounded like? Because there was no notation then.
It's instrumentation, isn't it? I mean, it's the use of certain kinds of horns.
So we can know, like, what the period instruments would have been.
Okay.
How would any of the actual songs or pieces of music survived? They would have had to have been, passed down like an oral tradition.
Right.
It's just funny that, like, the music will sound so seemingly authentic. How could we really know what the music of that time sounded
that's right.
like?
And I think that's another marker that while this movie goes to great efforts to look like it is in the ancient past, it's made in the late 50s and 60s, and it looks like that too.
Yeah.
I always like I like the gay bar scene in Star Wars,
right,
where they're clearly in the 70s, and a bunch of fellows are trying to find a port in a hole. You know what I mean? And that's what it sounds like. It's what it looks like, and yet we're supposed to be a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Mm. This is a lot like that. We're very much seeing an aesthetic of what beauty and physical grace looks like in the late 50s and 60s. But to also echo an historic past, which we can't otherwise verify or know.
Right.
There are many wonderful scenes outside where you have natural sunlight dappling what's going on in very impressive ways.
Yeah.
And truly, it's gigantic in scale. How did they accomplish that? How many weeks do they have to set up camp just to keep everybody from getting a sunburn and feed them so they wouldn't pass out?
Well, yeah, and I can't imagine the size of the generators,
right,
to power, because those lights back then. I mean, they didn't have no LEDs.
Yeah,
back at this, so it's a real location shooting like this is a tremendous effort to be able to pull off.
And that material struck me as the most historically valid to 2,000 plus years ago. Because we're really seeing four-legged animals called horses with people who are skilled riders of those horses, a bunch of people in armor marching at one another, or a bunch of people making camp and cooking food under fire or whatever. That strikes me as something that looks legitimately true to our best approximation of the historic record through a fictional account of a real event.
Yeah.
Then we go indoors to all of the palace intrigue sequences where you've got these palatial sets that go back tens of feet in deep focus, and everything about it has been dressed. The tile on the floor gleams. It's been mopped so clean. Again, a problem for reflected angles and light bounce and all of that. Jesus, what a problem.
Yeah, totally.
That looks false and looks like of the 1960s.
Right.
And that's when my mind drifted a little bit in one of my periodic digressions when I had to kind of take a pause. I felt as if this movie in some ways was laying the groundwork for the science fiction fantasy movies that would come later in the decade, but in particular something like Star Trek.
That's so funny that you would say that, because there were a number of times that I'm like, this looks like an episode of Star Trek.
It does. And I know that if we were to be really exacting historians and pop cultural aficionados, we would probably be able to go through the 60s on television in America, and then maybe globally, and we could go through other movies to see how this movie, among others, sort of ripples outward with certain kinds of influences. This is the summer of '63. JFK is in office. Our country is not yet hotly engaged in Vietnam. The college protest movement hasn't really codified just yet.
Yeah.
Civil rights agitation has moved into full-blown activism and hostility and violence. We're seeing the rise of the baby boom generation looking for entertainment and pointers on what adulthood ought to be, and television has conquered the world.
Yeah.
And so we bump into this thing, and it's trying to just take all of those things I've just mentioned and just dial everything a different direction on purpose, as if to just say, none of it matters. Go to 4.5 hours of show.
Yeah.
Another thing, there must be 3 or 4 or 5 dozen named parts in this. And I confess, for 2 hours, I'm like, well, I get that's Julius Caesar. I get that is Octavian. I get the principles. But then there's Agrippa, and there's just all these other... Who are these people again?
Yeah,
for a while.
I'm so thankful that I know the actors.
Exactly right.
Because I can, instead of referring to him as Octavian, I can refer to him as Roddy McDowell.
Yeah.
And
well,
whoever I'm watching will know who... Right,
yeah,
right.
Martin, he's back. I know him.
Yeah.
And you can keep track of things. And then it makes it confusing again. I'm ignorant, but... this movie re-pointed out one of those files that I don't keep refreshed very well in the front of my memory, that the important leaders of the world, including somebody like Julius Caesar, they were known by many different names as they accomplished stuff, conquered lands, were given titles.
They don't take any time to sort of give you like the historical content or like a historical lesson on it.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing can be like very confusing.
That
like,
was a
he's
couple
not
of my
Caesar,
pauses because I got to hit Wikipedia and find out some stuff. I'm not quite putting together the pieces.
Right.
And I'm a pretty good listener, but still. The point is, it overlapped with a bunch of significant and interesting movies from its year. And some of what it overlapped with suggests the different directions as an alternative to this kind of hugely expensive, you could say decadent and wasteful scale, to something much smaller, but maybe more interesting and significant. And here, I'm thinking about the Jack Smith experimental short, Flaming Creatures, which is one of the sort of defining objects of queer cinematic practice, which didn't become known as queer cinema until a generation later.
Right.
Bye Bye Birdie, HUD,
Yeah.
with beautiful Newman.
Yeah.
The Nutty Professor, Jerry Lee Lewis.
You know what? I might have been more interested in it if it had been Jerry Lee Lewis.
Jerry Lewis directing Jerry Lee. But Jerry Lewis behind this scene as the director and as the star. You get The Terror from Roger Corman.
The young, that's like Jack Nicholson's like first...
Yeah.
That or Little Shop of Horrors, I think.
Roughly the same time.
But we have Roger Corman to thank for Jack Nicholson as well.
The other one that came to mind, because I've enjoyed showing this to each of my children and enjoyed it as a child too, was Jason and the Argonauts, the British movie with stop-motion animation, which in some superficial ways overlaps with this kind of a movie, with armor and the boats. And
like a similar kind of a temporal setting.
Sort of.
But more fantastical.
And then you get these sort of Cold War stories, like PT-109, the John F. Kennedy story. Again, that's important because it's 6 months before the man is killed.
Yeah.
And then you get The Great Escape, and you get Blood Feast.
Blood Feast.
You know, kind of some rad underground horror stuff, which gave light to a lot of careers. You get Beach Party with Annette Funicello.
Yep.
Down on the Beach. Flipper. The Cool World, which is a really significant documentary. The VIPs, which is also Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, at the same time. They have two different movies that were top 5 box office hits at the same moment. Dementia 13 from Coppola, and Tom Jones, the eventual Academy Award winner, which I haven't seen in years, but I remember being completely charmed by, and it's half the length of Cleopatra.
Well, and let's not forget The Haunting starring Russ Tony Baker Tamblyn.
Right, because it's always High School Confidential,
Absolutely.
baby. And The Haunting it's a legitimately great, spooky, atmospheric movie of a haunted house. And, well, all of that stuff is, of course, not everything that was going on in the world of movies, but that does represent such a different set of choices.
Yeah.
Because you can see about 3 of some of these shorter movies for the length that is required to watch Cleopatra. And because we've already said, when this opened as a roadshow, the price point was so significant that people couldn't afford it in general.
Yeah.
Unless you were a rich person in Chicago or San Francisco, L.A. or New York. And, of course, those people exist.
Yeah. Thinking about Cecil B. DeMille's Cleopatra, and that came out time before TV. And the spectacle and the sort of the grandiosity is kind of similar. I don't know that DeMille's version financially how that compared to this one in terms of what it cost and stuff, but the point I'm trying to make is that like with these huge epic things, when you have distractions like television and all of these other smaller films, it sort of would seem to me to lessen the social importance of that kind of spectacle, whereas back when DeMille put out his Cleopatra, it's going to be like an event that like everybody's going to want to participate in because it's this huge thing and you never see anything like it, and there isn't other things.
And it does establish a template for how this form of entertainment ought to work, which these filmmakers are obligated to, in some ways, mirror.
Right. But then you've got TV and other stuff like sort of chipping away and people's attentions kind of being separated, not as concentrated. So something like this would be like less socially relevant.
The week this opens in June '63, I could have watched reruns of the Dick Van Dyke Show. Black and white, square image, fast repartee, over within 30 minutes, broken up by commercials, hawking soap, or whatever CBS wanted. That's not Cleopatra, man.
Right.
It is an entirely different aesthetic principle.
Totally.
I mean, it's fun to gaze upon the beautiful Elizabeth Taylor. This movie is not great, but this movie is impressive. This is Blockbusters and Birdwalks, a conversation between Garrett Chaffin-Quiray and
Ed Rosa.
Boop boobity doo.